We've got some big news. We're starting a new podcast community, and we want you to be a part of it. Head over to patreon.com/FemFreak to join the fun.
And so you have people from the disabled community saying, this is a real problem. The fact that you are taking a authentic, real condition that people have and sort of, and inserting it into the body of a horrifying figure works to continue to demonize, disabled people and disabled bodies.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 71, and I am your host, Anita Sarkeesian. I'm joined by my fellow Santa Cruz beach bums, Carolyn Pettit.
Hey, hey.
And Ebony Adams.
Hey.
This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. Or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. Today, we're going to be talking about Jordan Peele's fascinating new horror film, Us. And as always, we'll finish by each sharing a little something in What's Your Freak-Out? Now let's get to it. Hello.
Hey.
Hey.
I saw a horror movie.
Yeah, I'm very proud of both of you because I know it's not your jam.
No, it's not.
I don't mind it so much. I just wish I had someone to go with because I get real scared in there all by myself.
Oh, Carol.
Yeah, but no. But it was. I mean, I'm really glad I saw the film we're going to talk about today because it's very interesting. Very interesting film.
All right. Well, before we do that, let's talk about some possibly other horror news in the entertainment news.
All right. This week's entertainment news is going to be particularly rough and ready because I didn't really prepare it very well. But
don't tell people how the sausage is made.
Oh, come
Carol.
on! You're the one who's always doing that.
That's true. I am.
But so I'll just kind of wing it, and we'll do the best we can. So one of the most amusing stories for me out of the past week is Zack Snyder, director of many films, including the DC Universe films that featured Batman. I guess it was sort of, some people, there's like versions of Batman where he's very committed to not killing people, which doesn't mean that he won't like break their bones and torture the hell out of them and everything. But he like won't cross a line of killing them, but he'll absolutely make them, he'll inflict so much pain on them that they wish they were dead, but he won't kill them. But I guess in the DC, in Zack Snyder's films, like Batman doesn't seem to abide by this policy. And when confronted about this, Zack Snyder, here's Zack Snyder's quote. Someone says to me, Batman killed a guy. I'm like, fuck, really? Wake the fuck up. I guess that's what I'm saying. Once you've lost your virginity to this fucking movie and then you come and you say to me something about like, my superhero wouldn't do that. I'm like, are you serious? I'm like down the fucking road on that, which I don't even know what that means. I'm like down the fucking road on that, but that's what he said. And then he goes on to say, it's a cool point of view to be like, my heroes are still innocent. My heroes didn't fucking lie to America. My heroes didn't embezzle money from their corporations. My heroes didn't fucking commit any atrocities. That's cool, but you're living in a fucking dream world. But so the funniest thing about this to me was, obviously some people were like, that's pretty rich, like Zack Snyder, this like specifically this one tweet was like, the audacity of a rich, pampered, straight white man who constantly fails upwards, telling someone who doesn't like his juvenile, grim and gritty superhero movies to wake up to the reality of the real world is fucking hilarious. But also the funniest byproduct of this was a bunch of people taking the character of Darkwing Duck, who was like inspired by Batman, right? But obviously, anyway, and saying like, yeah, Darkwing Duck, loves to do murders. People wake the fuck up. Like it was, anyway, that was my favorite social media trend of the past week.
Fuck Zack Snyder and fuck this notion that, this like gory, hyper-violent, grim, dark, toxic masculine superhero is the most evolved version.
It reveals it holds up a mirror to our reality. Wake the fuck up,
sheeple. Wake up. Whatever, Zack Snyder.
Moving right along. Very surprising story from the past week is that all charges were dropped in the case against Empire star Jussie Smollett, who people probably recall, went to the police with a story about having been beaten and threatened by a couple of, racist men. And then the investigation turned on Smollett, and he was being charged. The general understanding was that he had kind of staged and fabricated the whole thing, and maybe paid people to help him, in creating this. And now the charges have been dropped, and the whole the political implications around this, or the political discussion around it, is very complicated, right? Because you have Rahm Emanuel coming out and talking about what a failure of justice it is that Smollett is able to kind of walk away from this, but the Chicago police force has to pay out maybe more in settlements for abuse and brutality and other violations than I think any other police force of a major city in the country. So and of course those violations are overwhelmingly against people of color. So Rahm Emanuel doesn't have some kind of platform to stand on morally to talk about this being some kind of failure of justice. So anyway, yeah, it's the details I think are mostly sealed. We don't really know what happened in the case or exactly why the charges were dropped, but certainly a very surprising development. And of course, one that a lot of racists are now using to paint a picture of to kind of attack the notion of white privilege in situations having to do with law enforcement, which is completely absurd.
Yeah, and there are apparently some productions that are saying they won't, film in Chicago where this has happened, or work with, people, connected to the case. I don't know that we, the general public, will ever, know for certain what happened with Jussie Smollett. But I will say this: if you take Chicago PD's word for anything, that's a huge problem. That's maybe your first and biggest problem. If CPD tells you water is wet, check that shit for yourself, because lying is their business. This is a police department that pays out hundreds of millions. You hear what I'm saying? Hundreds of millions to settle cases of police brutality every year. So I don't know that we want to, hold them up as paragons of integrity here against, the big bad black gay man.
Right, exactly. Also, another just big conversation on Twitter this past week erupted when Jezebel posted a story that basically said that Alanis Morissette's landmark album Jagged Little Pill was actually really bad. It was written by a woman named Tracy Clark Flory, who wrote about it as somebody who, as a young person, really, really relied on that album and found it very, very valuable. But now, as somebody who's 20 years older or more, is these melodies aren't good, or she's coming down on the musicianship and the songwriting construction and everything. And what this led to was, a lot of people saying, and I think rightfully so, hey, that album resonated with so many young people at the time, and isn't that valid, in and of itself? Isn't it enough for something to be art for young people and to really resonate with young people? Even if when you're older, it doesn't have the same maybe pull, or it doesn't hold up to you, that doesn't mean that it's actually bad. It's totally valid and legitimate to have a work of art, music or otherwise, that is really kind of for people at a particular, maybe very complicated, very difficult age, in their lives.
It's one thing to be hey, this thing in the past was really sexist or racist. And like, yeah, maybe at the time it didn't seem that way, but now with our like consciousness today, we see that. But just being like, this album sucked is kind of weird. Like, and it's not that you can't have that opinion. I don't understand why this exists, or like, it's very weird to me. The whole thing is weird to me.
Well, and I think it's also a move that women in particular are encouraged to do about the forms of media that they enjoyed when they were younger, in a way that I don't think boys are encouraged to do in quite the same way. Such that, you know, part of the piece about Jagged Little Pill, part of the problem seemed to be that this was an album that spoke to young women in a certain way, like it resonated with them, as you say, Caro, and that there's something juvenile and, you know, perhaps illegitimate or childish about that then the adult woman needs to put away. There is perhaps no person more reviled in media criticism than the teenage girl. Right? You know? And so, like, yeah, I think there was a lot of justifiable resistance to that, to this notion that, like, oh, because it spoke to young girls, that it's somehow less worthy as a piece of media. And, like, the whole notion that, like, our taste evolves, you know, is kind of problematic. Not that, you know, you can't change, not that certain things may speak to you at a certain point in your life and then other things later in life, but the notion that, like, your tastes evolve, we really need to unpack what that means, you know, and who is expected to have to do that evolution.
I also just want to point out, too, like, you can't remove the time period, which is what, Carol, you were sort of getting at. Like, around this time, there was, like, this sort of quote-unquote girl power movement that was happening that it was sort of mainstream. Like, we don't have time to get into it.
It was really glossy, though. It was very Spice Girls and stuff.
Yeah, but this was like, you know, you had Jill Solobule say her, like, the I Kissed a Girl, the original song, not the Katy Perry one. You had Meredith Brooks, like, I'm a Bitch, I'm a Lover, that song come out. Like, there was a bunch of, like, this music that came out around this time that I think a lot of people, a lot of young women especially, and girls were like, oh, I get to, like, have music for me and I get to feel powerful and shit, right? And what, Ebony, you're saying is that, like, so you get to go dismiss all of that now? Like, there was value in it at the time, even if it's a little bit cheesy now. And, like, who's to say what we're listening to now isn't fucking garbage?
Yeah.
Like,
or that in 20 years, right? We won't look back on it. Yeah. Course.
So it's fine to have the opinion. It's just a really weird, it's a weird thing to pull that album out and be like, this had an impact on me and now I think it's dumb. Like, I don't know. And I could say that about a lot of things. Like, I could write 20 essays right now about shit that I really loved when I was a kid.
Basically, the only, you know, type of article or hot take on this kind of thing that I want to read is people, dudes specifically, being like, I loved Ayn Rand when I was 17. Now I realize that was garbage. Those are the only ones I give a shit about.
Or, you know what could be interesting? Like, an interesting angle. I feel like an interesting angle would be how that album, like, what the equivalent to our current day album is, and then whatever, man, that was just a bad editing and a bad, like, that should never have made it onto the site in its current form. Whatever.
Yes, agreed.
There is a lot of talk about supporting independent media creators, and we think it's as valuable as ever these days to do just that. If you value smart, honest, feminist analysis, then come join our podcast community at patreon.com/femfreak. Plus, you'll get access to some fun perks, including the Freakin' After Party, our weekly post-show bonus exclusively for our patrons. That's patreon.com/femfreak.
The main for this week. Jordan Peele has unexpectedly followed up his career as part of a sketch comedy duo, Key and Peele, by becoming one of the most important filmmakers today. His follow-up to Get Out is Us, which stars Lupita Nyong'o as Adelaide Wilson, a woman who reluctantly goes on vacation with her husband and her 2 kids to the beach in Santa Cruz, where she had a traumatic experience in the Hall of Mirrors as a young child. Adelaide's premonitions that something terrible is going to happen prove true when her family is terrorized by another family that's a dark mirror of themselves.
Let's get into it.
All right, go, Ebony.
Oh boy. Okay, so from the time I first saw trailers for this film, I could not wait. I love Black people. I love horror. I love Jordan Peele. What movie was going to serve my interest quite so well? I'll tell you, no movie was going to serve my interest quite so well. As a horror fan, as someone who just enjoys watching movies, you can go into this film without any intention or desire to become kind of like a dollar store film critic and just enjoy what's happening on the screen. It is a very straightforward horror film in that way. And that in and of itself is remarkable and radical, right? But if you so choose, this film repays careful attention and repeat viewings in a way that I just find so thrilling, because it is a predominantly Black cast. It is a very thoughtful film. It does so many interesting things, some of which pay off, some of which are successful, some, not as successful. But I think as a piece of filmmaking, I love when filmmakers go for it, when they just go for it. And I think what we have here is something so new and so fresh. And I think like 2 films in, Get Out and Us, like people are getting their PhDs on Jordan Peele, right? Like I can think of very few filmmakers today who are engendering quite the level and quantity of critical talk, from two films.
Yeah. So speaking of that kind of critical talk, I mean, I hate to kind of cut right to the chase here, but I want to just talk about what I think is like really going on in this film. And not that there is like, okay, I hate like film theory, fan theory approaches that think like there is one right answer, and that one right answer is like will unlock the puzzle of the movie and etc. Like I want to be very clear that I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that this is like the one interpretation, but I feel like, but to me, this is some of what Jordan Peele was actually doing in the film. So there's to me, like maybe the most key line in the entire film is, so after, so Lupita Nyong'o's mirror, her name is Red, I think. And Red and her family, come into the home of the Wilsons. And, at one point, Adelaide, asks Red something like, "Who are you people?" And the answer from Red is, "We're Americans." And so I really feel like, so it's important in a way that the Wilsons are, they seem quite wealthy, or at least certainly like upper middle class. They're like living the American dream in one way. They've had like good health care. They've had the benefits of a good education. They've had good jobs, in one way or another. Like the American dream has, they've managed, even though the systems are in some ways rigged against them and et cetera, like they're succeeding within America, within the American system today. I feel like for me, the tethered, who Red and her family are like the first kind of emissaries of the tethered. To me, they are like the poverty. They're like the versions of ourselves that never get the benefits of anything that American society has to offer to those who benefit from it. They're like the mirrors of all of us. Like who would we be like? How much of our potential is determined by whether we gain access to things or don't. So I see in them like they're the poverty stricken, the people who don't get good educations, the people who don't have good health care. I think that's particularly evidenced in the birth, like the differences between Jason and Pluto, like how Pluto is burned. Like in birth, I think in childbirth, like I think it's all of these kinds of things. I don't know. That's primarily what I saw happening with the dichotomy between like the tethered and the people on the surface of like literally the surface of the United States, as is particularly driven home by that final image.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Teddy is Andrew and he killed his own wife.
In which the tethered are like recreating Hands Across America.
Spoilers.
Okay, I mean,
I think this are going to have a non-spoiler conversation.
Yeah,
but
I don't think there's any way to talk about this without spoilers. But I have loved.
Well, but
reading-
hold on. I think, okay, I feel like there's going to be a bunch of people who aren't going to go see the movie, but will still listen to us talk about it. So I want to just clarify that the Hands Across America thing, at the very beginning, we see a video clip from 1986 where the news is talking about this idea of Hands Across America, where 6 million Americans are going to hold hands from coast to coast.
Yes.
And so that then gets repeated, that symbolism and metaphor gets repeated, that when the tethered come from the up from the underground, they hold hands across like coast to coast, as a sort of, it almost feels like an uprising idea.
Yeah, but and it's important that this this notion of recreating Hands Across America was part of Red's plan, and that, you know, this is something that she saw at a formative point in her childhood, right? Like, there's a very real case of arrested development here. So the Hands Across America, the Thriller / Freddy Krueger glove that she wears, like this is a 10-year-old's version of, you know, rising up and reclaiming things, because the character of Red is, you know, is sort of stuck, perpetually stuck in that moment.
So the fact that it happens to be a Michael Jackson shirt that she wins and wears,
right,
in the opening of a film, which is set in 1986, I guess.
Yeah.
It takes on this fascinating weight too, when I started thinking about the duality of Michael Jackson, especially as we understand it today, like his public image of being so sweet and like concerned with like the well-being of children, even like, you know, his songs like Man in the Mirror and other songs that, you know, gave him almost this kind of humanitarian vibe as a singer and an artist, and then of course the truth of what we know about him, that, like, you know, there's like a dark mirroring just encompassed within our cultural reckoning of like Michael Jackson himself as just an individual figure.
Yeah.
So I had some issues with this movie.
Okay.
I just want to say first and foremost that Lupita Nyong'o was fucking unbelievable. Like, she held this movie for me in a way that I think I would have been a lot more lost otherwise. That, like, her ability to play these two characters and then the complicatedness and the subtlety of her acting, like, she just shone. Unbelievable. And I think everyone was really good, but she just really was so incredible. Okay, so I think that a couple of things for me I struggled with in terms of trying to suss out like the message. And I really liked Manolo Charges's review in the New York Times, because while she, you know, praises the movie, she does say that, that Peele is being a little too ambitious here, and that it feels like, her quote is, he also feels like an artist who's been waiting a very long time to say a great deal, and that if Get Out was his first act, this movie feels like his second and third act. And I agree with that. I feel like there's a lot going on in a way that makes it a little convoluted, as opposed to, and not to compare with Get Out, but it's hard not to, where Get Out was very clear, and Manola describes it as narrative elegance, a streamlining that makes it feel shorter than like the time period of the film, where she says Us feels a little bit longer than the time of the film. So I just putting that out there. I'll link that article if you want to read it. I think I struggled a little bit with how I spent a long time of the film being like, who am I rooting for? And it doesn't, and I don't necessarily mean like, oh, it has to be clean cut.
Yeah. But
there is a little bit of like, well, are we rooting for the underground folks to like be liberated because we're talking about like xenophobia and socialism and like who is the discarded and who is not valuable? But then you also have these people who are extremely violent, right? Who like, it's this violent uprising. And I'm like, okay, well, sometimes uprisings and the fight for liberation is violent. That makes sense. But because it's in this container of horror, I struggled a little bit with what that means and what that looks like. And like, I want the liberation of those people, but at the cost of the murder of everybody else, like that. And maybe I'm being a little too literal here, but like that was kind of hard for me to reconcile and to really understand. Like I walked out of the theater being like, wait, what?
Yeah, I want to honor that reaction. And having not read the Manohla Dargis review, I can't really speak to it, but based upon just the summary that you've given.
Sorry, let me clarify. The quotes about the third and second act and that stuff, that's all Manohla Dargis. Me talking about the violent uprising, that's all me.
Yeah. But I guess what I want to say is that I think so much of our reading, like the sort of possibilities that we are allowing for us, are based upon the fact that this is Jordan Peele's second movie after Get Out. I think that Get Out is the film he had to do first. I don't think he would have been allowed to do Us first. And I think in many ways, Get Out is a much more streamlined, I don't want to say simple film, but elegant, to echo your word, Anita, because in many ways it sort of travels along kind of traditional lines. And although it looks in a fresh and new way, and gives us a different perspective on a particular kind of like racialized trauma. Nevertheless, this is the story that we're very familiar with and that we're very comfortable hearing from Black people, right? I think Us is a harder film. And I think that in a lot of ways, we do not allow people of color, Black filmmakers to make difficult films in the way that we grant that kind of license to white filmmakers. Particularly when the films do not allow for kind of easy unpacking. So I think, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I love that this is a very ambitious film. And I do think there are things that Peele, attempts in the film that maybe don't pay off necessarily for me personally, but just the notion that Peele should have waited, that he should have perhaps done, more kind of prep work as a filmmaker before releasing this film, I think is a very interesting kind of take, because I don't necessarily
I don't
know
think it's about more prep work. I think the issue is like how, like, I hear what you're saying, and I'm being like, okay, well, I walked out of it being like, maybe this is not a film for me, and I don't understand the perspective from my positionality in life. But I also like, I think the point is the point that's being made is like, how many points do you need to make in the film? And at what point does that get diluted? Right? Like it's not necessarily like do more work. It's like, could you have made like 3 points instead of 20 points?
So speaking for myself, like I think that's an absolutely valid criticism and a totally valid point of view, because I guess part of this, it is when I go into a horror film, I almost expect things to get like messy and uncomfortable, even in a symbolic sense, because I feel like part of what horror is a space where we can explore like the kind of the messiness and the ambiguity, even, and maybe even the conflict, the dichotomy, the dichotomies of things, or how things aren't always so clean cut, and so for me, because I don't take the film literally, like the murderous rage of the tethered, to me, I was like, well, yes, that makes sense. Like, of course, because of like, they should be just like, again, to put that kind of, if I were going to put a political lens on it, like, of course, socialists or like working people who've been denied, the rightful wages all their years should be like angry. And of course, that doesn't literally mean socialists should go on murderous rampages. But if we're going to translate that into like a horror film, like it kind of works for me. And I think the film deliberately wants to make us uncomfortable around that question of who do we root for. And I think that's kind of what the final twist is all about in a way.
Yeah, and like there's something interesting here about like, so we've already spoiled a ton, but spoilers, Adelaide is actually the original tethered and she swapped places.
Right.
Like she kidnapped who we now see as Red, shoved her underground, and Adelaide, who is originally it's a twist, right? Yeah. So there's something to be said here about the fact that like that she can flourish. Like she, with support and love and nurturing, like everyone can be taken care of and do well, right?
Yeah.
But so to me, like I have such a hard time not being literal about this because I hear you and now I'm like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have taken this so literally. But I'm like, it's at like the way that the film positions it is it's at the cost of one or the other as opposed to.
And I think the film is saying like that's the whole problem, right? Is that it shouldn't be that way. Like there shouldn't be that the mirror, like the mirror world and the surface world, like everyone should be on the surface world. But the reality is in America that there is the mirror, the mirror world and the surface world. And I loved that, you know, there's that ending shot where like Jason is like looking at his mom and, you know, feeling like something's a little stranger, like, you know, he doesn't quite know what to believe anymore. And Adelaide herself has this look on her face. And all I could think about was how, I grew up, lower, like poor working class. Like we, my mom was the only breadwinner. She worked nights to, put food on the table. There were constantly people calling, creditors. She was in constant fear of losing the house. Like we always thought that, anyway, it was a really my whole childhood was financially like really scary. And whenever I find myself in situations where I feel like I've kind of risen above that or come out of that, and I'm like in a situation where like I'm surrounded by people who have no understanding of what that experience is like, I get that like that uneasy feeling of like, do I belong here? Like, have I come from another world? And so for me, the ending of the film really like spoke to that, like the way Adelaide is now in the world of the surface, and as you say, flourishes and benefits from everything there. But I think will always be a little different because of where she comes from.
I think part of what is so chilling, but also, heartbreaking about the experience of The Tethered is the things that they prize are such small things. So when, Red first starts to explain who she is and why this is happening, she says, and it's framed in the form of a fairy tale almost. Once upon a time, there was a girl who, grew up with presents and wonderful food to eat, but she had a shadow who was forced to eat raw rabbit and whatever, and the notion that like having a family that cares about you or having enough food or being able to dance, or in the case of Elizabeth Moss character, Dahlia is the tethered version of her character. Oh my God. The close-up we get of her face when it transforms as she's watching, her husband partner, be murdered, the transformation of her face from horror and sadness and grief to this wild laughter as she tries on these new emotions, the freedom and the joy she feels in being able to just simply express, these emotions that she has not had access to before. It's such small things for these people. Yes, there are the trappings of the above ground world, and particularly in the case of like Elizabeth Moss and Tim Heidecker's characters, these are wealthy people, so yes, it's about having access to those things, but there's also just so much intangible benefit like the privilege of just being fully alive that the tethered are looking for.
Exactly.
I want to talk about the monstrous body in this film. One of the conversations that's happening right now is a discussion about the voice that Red uses. So the voice that Lupita Nyong'o uses for Red in the film, and the very I'm going to try and be very careful here, but it is clear that the sound of her voice, the pain that it appears to cause her to vocalize, is meant to be part and parcel of the fear we feel about her character. Like, it's part of what is meant to make her horrifying. And Nyong'o has talked about the inspiration for the voice that she does for Red, and how part of it came from hearing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has something called spasmodic dysphonia, and the sort of understanding Nyong'o has about this neurological condition, whereby the person vocalizing is afflicted with like these vibrations that make the voice sound the way that it does, right? And so you have people from the disabled community saying, this is a real problem. The fact that you are taking a authentic, real condition that people have and sort of, and inserting it into the body of a horrifying figure works to continue to demonize, disabled people and disabled bodies. And there's been this really interesting conversation about that. And of course, y'all know I spend all my time on Twitter between the disabled community as represented by white disabled folks really taking Lupita and Peele and the film itself to task for this, versus people in the Black disabled community saying this, let's absolutely talk about this, but let's not hold, Black creators to account in a way that we don't white filmmakers. So I want to talk about that a bit, but I think there's also something going on with the notion of the monstrous body in Pluto. So Jason's double, right? And part of what makes him horrifying is his burned face. And I think about how it was a problem for me, because I really have trouble with this notion of deformity being horrifying, difference being horrifying. It is not hard to trace a line from this body is non-normative, is non-standard, because it has, been born a certain way, or it is because it experienced certain trauma in a certain way, to, like differently gendered bodies, differently racialized bodies. I want to unpack that a bit. I'm not saying it needs to happen right now, but the notion of the monstrous body in this film, I felt like there was a lot going on, and I wasn't quite sure how to apprehend it all. It's partly interesting to me because the Black body has been the monstrous body in film for so long. I want to shout out a film that I talked about in a FREQ-Out like months ago, Horror Noir, which you can see on Shudder, which is all about like Black people and their relationship to the horror genre. And it is this wonderful, documentary about how the Black body itself has been the site of horror for so long in film. And so when we get to a point where that's no longer acceptable, where that's no longer like a prevailing trope that has currency, what stands in for the monstrous body, and how does it still inflect upon our understanding of race? And so it's very interesting to me that this film gives us something we very rarely get, which is a horror film in which Black people are the protagonists. They are the people that we are encouraged to root for, right? But there's still this specter of the monstrous body on there in a very problematic way.
So I'm contextualizing the way that I'm thinking about it based on that new information, because you're right, it is read as horrifying and monstrous, but I didn't actually, who cares what I thought, but I didn't actually read it that way. I saw it more as like, this kid is so dangerous that he even did this to himself. because they really pushed the notion of like the pyromaniac. He literally runs around like an animal on all fours. The sort of terrifying animalness of Pluto. And that he could do this to you as well, or like you could get harmed by him as well. And that fear of like, you know, when Jason takes him into the closet because he knows he can lock him in there, that you're like, oh God, what's going to happen between the time that he locks him in there and then he gets himself out potentially. So I kind of read it as that as opposed to monstrous, but yeah, like absolutely. Because also when someone, I forget who it is, but someone else sees his face, they're also horrified, and it's not for the same reason.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is there's like, it's the accumulation of qualities, right? So yes, it's the fact that he, and also I'm glad you pointed out the way he moves, because again, so often bodies that don't move in the ways that we thinks bodies should are like the agile, like we push them away, we're repelled by them. And I'm like, imagine what it is like to be a disabled person who walks with a limp or a halting gait, you know, and to have that be read as monstrous, to have that read as like dangerous, is something that needs to be run from.
I grew up with my dad has a disability. One of his legs is shorter than the other. And so he has to get custom made shoes that have a high heel on one leg. And I remember growing up and like constant comments about like, why is that man wearing a high heel? Mm-hmm. Like that's what women wear. Why would men wear that?
Yeah.
Like we don't know what to do with. And obviously this is just my own personal family example, but like you're right. Like we really don't know what to do with people who are in any way different from what we consider to be the norm. Mm-hmm. And we just like gape and stare at them. Yeah.
And going back to the documentary Horror Noir, I can't recommend this documentary enough. I love, again, as someone who really loves horror, there's a moment in the documentary where I think it might have been author Tananarive Due, who's amazing, talks about how Black people play a particular role in horror films. And that is, one, they allow a largely white audience to recognize the true extent of the horror, right? Because if you have like a badass Black dude who gets killed by the monster, then you know how bad that monster is, how evil that monster is. You know, so it's a way of, you know, demonstrating how extensive the evil is. But also, it allows like a sort of, you know, the body count to accumulate without danger to the real characters. So to have a film in which Black people, like, they both do and don't stand for something else. Like you can absolutely read this film as just like, you know, accumulation of symbol after symbol after symbol. But you can also read it as just like, this is a Black family that is undergoing this horrific experience, you know, and there is no sacrificial Negro in the film. The entire film, like they are centralized in a way that we so rarely get. Like just on that level alone, this is amazing.
I also just really quickly want to mention to listeners who may not have seen the film that it's also a really funny movie. Or it's not like funny constantly, but it has these moments of humor that break the tension so effectively. And I was just so grateful for those. Like there's like a few dialogue exchanges between family members that are just, you know, they're relatable. They're funny. It's just, they're wonderful. Like the moments of humor in this film are wonderful. So, I encourage, I definitely, for all of its, complexities and problematic elements, I definitely recommend people go see this film.
Yeah, I also want to just point out, like, I really hate horror movies, and I really didn't want to see this. Like, the trailer scared me shitless. But it's not... I think that if you could handle Get Out, it is kind of similar in that it's very psychological. It's a little more violent. It's a little gorier, but there's nothing explicit. Like, you don't actually see... Like, when violence happens, it's cut away, and you see, like, the symbolicness of it. So if you are on the fence about it for that reason and you want to see it, I recommend seeing it. I think I think you should be fine. I don't know you at all. But
Anita says you should be fine.
Yeah. The film is rich in incredible symbolism. It's beautiful filmmaking. It's great acting. Like there's a lot of reasons to check it out. So I do highly recommend it. In terms of like, I don't highly recommend it because you just heard me talk shit about it, but I think that it's valuable. It's a valuable film to see. Okay, that's it. I don't know why I ended that poorly. Let's move on to what's your freak out? All right, Carolyn, what are you freaking out about?
Okay, I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I totally didn't have a freak out prepared. But like right before we started recording this, I happened to watch the trailer that's just been released for Jim Jarmusch's upcoming zombie film, The Dead Don't Die. And this is a film that it has a lot of like Jarmusch regulars in it. It has Adam Driver, Bill Murray, Tilda Swinton, but the RZA, but it has a really expansive cast, a big ensemble. But it looks just from the trailer already like just the most deadpan. So Jim Jarmusch, he's a very important and celebrated American filmmaker. His most popular film probably was Only Lovers Left Alive, which is
that's one of my all-time favorite films.
Yeah. This looks obviously like a much more comedic. It has a much more comedic bent to it. But it's a zombie movie by Jim Jarmusch. It looks so deadpan and just pleasurable, like as a movie-going experience. It just looks like it's going to be a fun movie-going experience that's kind of playing with like zombie movie convention, but not like really being like a scary zombie movie. I would expect. I mean, it may have a little bit of actual horror in it, but anyway, so Bill Murray and Adam Driver as like these two cops who in this small town who is suddenly stricken by a zombie outbreak, and like, what are these cops in a small town who have no preparation for this whatsoever gonna do? Anyway, looks great. I'm very excited to see it. That's my freak out.
Cool. Ebony, what are you freaking out about?
I'm freaking out about a YouTube video by one of my absolute favorite commentators and media critics that I want everybody to check out. It's called The Lost Magic, Menace, and Melancholy of Diablo.
Oh my god!
By a media critic called Carolyn Pettit.
Yeah.
Like for real though, Carolyn, I love you as a person, but as a thinker, I love the way your brain works. I think there's something so inviting about the way that Caro approaches a topic. There's been this recent tendency in all sorts of criticism, whether it's film criticism, literary criticism, whatever, right? To start from a very like oppositional place, and there's room for that and there's a place for that. But it is also so nice to know that a critic is starting from a place of like genuine inquiry and interest, and to know that they are really interested in having a conversation, a dialogue, to have someone have a very inviting tone that says, hey, have you thought about this? Or, you may not have noticed this, or what do people think about this? And I think this is something that Carolyn does very well, while at the same time, introducing sometimes very complicated, very nuanced, issues in games or film that might not have occurred to you. So like, even if Caro was not my good buddy on the podcast, I would encourage people to check out her work, but it just makes it, that much better that I get to talk to her every week. So anyway, check out Caro's new video, The Lost Magic, Menace, and Melancholy of Diablo.
Thanks, Ebony. That's very kind of you.
I'm freaking out about a album by Little Sims called Gray Area. She is a young rapper out of London. What?
There was just something so charming about the way you said that. She is a young rapper.
I think she's like 25. Her real name is Simbi Ajikawo. Sorry for butchering that. This album is incredible. It's her third studio album. This is my first introduction to her. It's really good. It's really, really, really good. And if you're into cool ladies doing rap, sort of like she's exploring her 20s
so this is going to be the jagged little pill of 20 years from now, when people,
it might be.
Yeah.
Apparently, I was reading a little bit about her. Apparently she's been rapping since she was like 9, and that's why I was really surprised at like how solid she is at this age. I don't know, I think it's amazing. I don't have anything deep and profound to say other than like I think that there's some really interesting commentary, and her rhymes are really good, her performance is amazing, and the album as a whole, like as a piece of work all together, is just super captivating. So check it out. Little Sims, it's SIMZ, and the album is called Gray Area. This week our listener freak out comes from Katie. Take it away, Katie.
So this week I'm freaking out about a new movie that just opened in UK cinemas. It's called The Fight, and it's been directed and written by Jessica Hines, and she also stars in it. And it's her directorial debut, and I have to say she does an amazing job. The movie is beautifully directed and amazingly acted by a wonderful cast of British actors. And what I like the most about it is that it's a slice of life movie. It doesn't have the typical Hollywood setup of, here's the situation, something goes wrong, and then you can very easily work out how the characters are going to deal with it and resolve it and how it's going to end. This just shows you a family and a mother, and she goes through her everyday life, and you slowly learn, what's going on, how are things affecting everyone, and what the movie is about. And that's the main reason why I love it so much, is the subject matter, which is anger and violence, but experienced and committed by women, and how that affects the women that commit the violence and, experience those emotions, but also generations of their families and people around them. And, this perspective is not very often looked at in mainstream media. We normally have this from a male perspective. So I thought this movie has told an amazing story in a beautiful way, and also is talking about important things that don't get very often talked about in the media. So I very much recommend it to all the UK audiences, and I hope it comes to the rest of the world soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you want to make it onto our show, you can submit your own freak out. Just head over to feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. All right, y'all, that's our show. You can catch us back here every single Wednesday. Stay tuned for the freaking after party, which is only available to backers of this podcast, which you can be so easily. Just head over to patreon.com/femfreak. If you're enjoying this show, please rate and review us on iTunes. And when you're hanging out on the beach and a friend of yours is going on and on about her latest plastic surgery, and that she's like, you look exactly the same as last year. And she's like, oh, thank you. It's a very funny scene in the movie. Anyways, you can tell her that you care about this particular podcast called Feminist Frequency Radio. Check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at FemFreak to stay up to date on all of our exciting news. I'm at Anita Sarkeesian.
I'm at Carolyn Michelle.
I am at The Tethered.
Ooh, who has that? Whoever has that better have something good on it.
Yeah.
Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music. Technical support by Sarah Norales. Production assistance by Taylor Simmons. Art by Jamie Varon. We'll see y'all next week.
Later.
Bye.